Hello, ladies and gents. The issue of borderline personality disorder came up again recently, and some people were criticizing me for my comments about people who've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, just so that we're all on the same page. Borderline personality disorder, as a diagnosis given by clinicians, is done under a very, very straightforward system of criteria. There are 9 criteria to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I've written them here in scroll. Number 1, intense feelings of abandonment, and they seek to avoid that abandonment at all costs. Doesn't say it, but as people who've interacted with borderlines know, they will then usually go on to cause that abandonment to occur further down the line. Number 2, unstable interpersonal relationships. Relationships are unboundaried, very intense, full of projection, full of confusion, merged expectations, oversharing that then leads to bouts of shame and then a desire to take revenge on the person overshared with. Number 3, intense identity disturbance. Number 4, impulsivity and self-destructiveness in at least 2 areas of life. Things like binge eating, taking drugs, gambling, self-harm, promiscuous sex. Number 5, suicidal ideation, suicidal behaviour, or self-mutilation. Number 6, affective instability. Well, I've been chatting about this as emotional dysregulation. Intense emotional dysregulation, marked reactivity of mood. Number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. Number 8, rage. Number 9, paranoid ideation and severe dissociation. In all the published literature that you will find, peer-reviewed published literature by proper people, clinicians, and the folk of universities and institutions, they will tell you always that BPD is always comorbid with another diagnosis, always. And that is known within the literature that BPD is often misdiagnosed. Some people who do have BPD are not diagnosed with it. Other people who do not have it are diagnosed with it, and that it's written of in the literature as being mistaken and confused with bipolar disorder and particularly PTSD. What is not spoken about as much is the relationship between BPD and CPTSD. So let's start there. When you go and see a clinician, and don't fantasize and be solipsistic and egocentric. Clinicians are not out there looking for borderline personality disorder. You might find a specialist in borderline personality disorder, but I have spoken to clinicians and psychiatrists, plural, who don't know what the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder. I'll say it again. I've spoken to psychiatrists and psychotherapists, qualified, practicing now. They don't know what the diagnostic criteria are for borderline personality disorder. Now, as you clutch your pearls and recoil in horror at their incompetence, just remember this. They're not out there looking for cluster B personality disorders. That's not what most clinicians and psychotherapists do. This whole sphere, like this fixation that people have that has driven the viewership of this particular channel, which is massively being driven by people's focus on narcissistic personality disorder and then borderline personality disorder, histrionic, and psychopathy. In the real world, boys and girls, the institution of psychology doesn't really give a shit about it. There are specialists. There are people who make this their dissertation. They make this their PhD. They make this the thing that they're going to focus on. But the world of psychology isn't awake at night going, how do we resolve the cluster B personality disorder issue? To them, it's not an issue. To the Institute of Psychology does not function in the way that most people who I'm talking to online or most people I'm working with clearly think it functions. They have a naive view of how psychology functions. It is not groups of people all across the world huddled in a circle trying to figure out how to heal humanity. That's not what the institution of academic psychology, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and psychiatry is all about. You will find plenty of people out there who, if you meet them and you say, oh, you're a psychotherapist, do you know about borderline personality disorder? You'll get this response. Yep. Because they don't want to tell you, fuck, I forgot that. I might have studied it for my degree, but I don't know about it. That's the clinician issue. That's an important issue. Please remember that. When people are coming to me and attacking me for what I've said about borderlines, remember that your diagnosis from a qualified professional, a doctor, a person with a PhD, you qualify their qualification first, okay? Here's something else. Of this list, which would not be covered by CPTSD? What's on this list that isn't covered by CPTSD? Let's look. Intense feelings of abandonment, a desire to avoid the abandonment, and then accidentally creating that abandonment. Do people who are highly emotionally dysregulated and traumatized do that? Yes. Is that particular one more prevalent perhaps with people with PTSD? Yes, perhaps. Don't know. It's not conclusive, but there is published research out there. I can find it for you if you want. I've cited it here on the channel before. They were looking at combat veterans in America in particular, and they looked at the combat veterans who weren't recovering from their PTSD, particularly the ones who, like, because there was a whole group of people who were very responsive to the treatment for PTSD, and there was this group that wasn't. And so why is that? So they started testing them for different things. They gave them a test for borderline personality disorder, and guess what? All the 60% tested positive. So of the people who weren't recovering from PTSD, they tested positive for borderline personality disorder. I looked at that and I went, CPTSD. Because they're not looking for that. Because they're not looking for it, they don't find it. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't go for a test to see if you have borderline personality disorder and have your blood drawn and your urine checked for evidence of neurotransmitters that would only be produced in the proximity of extreme emotional dysregulation. They ask you questions and they'll say, do you fear abandonment? And if you choose to lie, you destroy the test. If you choose to lie in either way, you can lie. Maybe you know what borderline personality disorder is. So you say, I'm just going to lie and make sure I get a positive on this test. Or I'm going to lie in such a way that means I won't get a positive on this test. It doesn't take much intelligence to do that. And you can prove that immediately. You can go online right now and you can do tests for psychopathy and tests for narcissistic personality disorder. Don't rehearse, don't revise. Just go, I'm going to do this test on psychopathy, pick one at random, and I want to be proved positive. And I'm going to take this test for narcissism and I want to seem negative, and then just answer the questions. Psychology is an enormously naive topic. It's as an institution where the academic world meets the real world, meets humans, like people with real problems, it is mind-numbingly naive and still a field very much in its infancy. A field that may never grow out of its infancy because it insists on certain paradigms and on certain structures. Identity disturbance. CPTSD? Well, we don't hear about it that much. But yes, definitely you will have issues around who you think you are if you're riddled with emotional flashbacks. Impulsivity, self-destructiveness in two areas absolutely rings all the bells for CPTSD. Suicidal ideation, self-mutilation, suicidal activity, PTSD, classic PTSD and classic for CPTSD as well. Yes and yes. Affective instability marked by reactivity of mood, emotional dysregulation and emotional flashbacks. Chronic feelings of emptiness could be what does Pete Walker call it? The abandonment melange of emotions. A melange of nasty emotions could be a flashback to feelings of being left and then feeling empty in the absence of parents. So yeah, that's covered by CPTSD. Rage, we call it fight response. Yes, that's covered. Paranoid ideation, severe dissociation, to freeze and flight responses. And paranoid ideation, well, where does that come from in CPTSD? When people are highly emotionally dysregulated, what happens to their perceptions? Their perceptions warp. When people are riddled with emotional flashbacks, of course, their perceptions warp and they become paranoid and insecure because they're doing this all the time. I suggest to you, in my estimation, I am just a life coach. I never wanted to come on YouTube and talk about fucking narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. This is where people wanted me to go. I wanted to teach NLP, hypnosis, and self-assertiveness techniques. This was a channel that was an extension of a self-defense channel that I used to run called streetfightsecrets.com. I only started studying borderline personality disorder in 2014. Before late 2013, I didn't even know what it was. I'd never heard of it. But you did a degree. That's right. And in my degree, we were not allowed to discuss personality disorders, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis. If you said Jung or Freud, you could be kicked out the class. You could learn personality disorders in my psychology degree. You were allowed to. You had one elective. It was 10 weeks long. It was 1 term long. And it was 1 hour a week, and it was everything. And it was called abnormal psychology. Aston University is not big on like healing childhood trauma and teaching people how the different modalities. We didn't do anything on that. We didn't do anything on this kind of thing, and that's perfectly common in most degrees. The story I'd most like to tell, just to keep people, like, give them a little slap in the face and make them realize what it's actually like out there. I met a psychiatrist, newly qualified, and she told me that she'd been put on mission to work in an institution. And she said, yeah, I'm working with mentally ill homeless people every day. I went, yeah. She said, it's starting to upset me, and my moods are changing, and I've noticed that I'm becoming a different person. I said, yeah. She said, well, can you help me? I was like, you're a fucking psychiatrist. Don't you know what's happening? She said, no. I said, do you know about emotional dysregulation? Well, yeah, we covered it. Do you know about borderline personality disorder? No, I've never heard of that. I said, there's no way you qualified if you've never heard of it. She claims she'd never heard of borderline personality disorder. When we started trying to talk about second-hand and third-hand trauma, she was looking at me because I told her that I thought that she was getting traumatized. She was receiving second and third-hand trauma. And she looked at me like I'd said, oh, your chakras are out of alignment and the only solution would be yoga and chanting. She looked at me like I was completely fucking crazy. Like it was not the vaguest possibility. Trauma contagious. All right, mate. I'm sorry I asked you now. You flipping weirdo. I'm like, yeah, there are different. So psychology and psychiatry are not one unanimous field that just say this is the orthodoxy, this is what we all believe. It's unfolding, it's in its infancy. People are arguing. You have schools that go against each other. The way it's done in England doesn't agree with the way it's done in Germany. The way it's done in Europe isn't the way it's done in America. There's people in Europe who contact me who are like, why are you using the DSM? Why are you using the American Psychiatric Association's definition of the cluster B of these personality disorders? They call it the cluster B. The Americans call it the cluster B. That's one way of looking at it. I chose it because I have my reasons for choosing that. I'm new to the subject, and I found that a nice, simple, structured way of getting into it. But I see the problems with it. I've mentioned them on the channel before. It's not, written on slabs of stone handed down from Mount Sinai. It's humans vote. Well, in America, they literally vote for the existence or non-existence of personality disorders and other mental health issues. It is done by vote. That is how the American Psychiatric Association works. That is how it has worked for years. The DSM forms committees. The last DSM is at DSM-5, 2013. I've talked about this on the channel before. You had a committee of, I think it was 17 humans to talk about what would be in the cluster B chapter, and they didn't all agree. Because why would they all agree? Borderline, if somebody comes to me and they say, I have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and I don't like what you have to say about borderlines, my immediate response is, how do you know? How do you know you have this thing that's called borderline personality disorder? Because of this. All of this, apart from, the abandonment issue, that's more, I would class that as being more, it's covered by CPTSD, it's explainable with CPTSD, but I class it more as a PTSD response. An identity disturbance, more of a PTSD response. But CPTSD is always comorbid with PTSD. There's no such thing as CPTSD without PTSD. There's no such thing as PTSD without CPTSD. And so I say, where in all this is the predatory behavior? Where's the predatory behavior? Where's the entitlement? Where's the exploitation? And you go, well, you, Mr. fucking idiot, sitting on a couch somewhere in a vest, You don't get to say that it needs that. Actually, I do. Actually, I do get to say that it needs that, because unbeknownst to me, even as far back as 2013, I was dealing with borderline personality disorder people all day, every day. When I first started coaching, I was a huge magnet for people with BPD. And if you know anything about BPD, you'll know exactly why people with BPD came to me for coaching en masse. That was pretty much, I would say, 80% of the clients that I worked with. And I kept working with them until I got very, very sick. In the end, I got physically sick from it, because a lot of my clients were sick themselves. And that was the purpose of the interaction. So I do get to say, and many clinicians agree with me, if there is no entitlement and no exploitation, you shouldn't be diagnosing people with borderline personality disorder. It's not fair. So why do they? Because those that are trained, and very few are interested, very few are trained, very few. I shouldn't say that. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but when I'm talking to people, I'm like, doesn't seem to be as well. Like, I'm in the reality tunnel of cluster B personality disorders. I don't get to go a week without thinking about it, talking about it, reading about it, or researching it. So, but they do. They go for months, they go for years, and it just doesn't come across the desk. Equally weighted. Do you see that as being a problem? I see that as being a problem. I don't see that as being a very subtle way of telling me whether somebody has an extremely complicated and, may I add, very rare personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is extremely rare. So is narcissism. Not full-blown narcissistic personality disorder is extremely rare. This is the diagnostic criteria. This is how we tell. They're equally weighted traits. Doesn't that tell you something? It tells me something. That's infantile. That is incredibly crude. This is a shopping list of traits that I and the client are between us through language, not through blood tests, not through urine tests, through a conversation that takes place between two consenting adults. We're going to both agree that you have 7 of the 9 and you have borderline personality disorder. See you next week. Have a good day. See you later. Bye. And out the door they go. I've got borderline personality disorder. Have you? How is this legal? How is it legal to rubber stamp people with a label that hit, like, in the, I'm talking now, not YouTube, not online narcissism forums, in the published research of the scientific a field of study called psychology, that traces its roots back to psychopathy. Historically, borderline personality disorder, historically in its root, is traced back to psychopathy. And what was psychopathy originally? What was it originally? When we're talking cluster B, we're actually talking permutations of psychopathy. I'm not saying if you've been diagnosed with BPD, you have psychopathy. I'm saying that in the clinical literature, naive, faulty as it is, it's trying to be a science when I think it should just be a branch of philosophy that uses the scientific method to the best of its abilities and have the humility to say, hey, we don't know. We really don't. It's not a science. We can't test your pee. We can't test your blood. We have this. I'm sorry, that is not good enough. That's nowhere near fucking good enough. I don't know how this is legal. So when you call somebody, you label somebody borderline personality disorder, you have put them in a bracket of people the same as psychopaths, and the term borderline grew from psychopathy. I'll give you the big boring history lesson, but psychopathy, like psychopath, well, psychopath, mind in pain, psyche, pathology, mind, mental suffering, mental illness. Who did they originally call psychopaths in the 1840s, in the 1850s, in the old French and the old English asylums? Single women who'd had children and were not married, and who were addicted to gin. They were psychopaths. Men who didn't worship God and stole money from travelers. They were psychopaths. And they were, in the view of the day, it's culture-bound syndrome. It's a culture-bound nomenclature. They were just like, we are good men of science. We are doctors. Why would you, good lady, why would you, outside of wedlock, rot with men and produce bastards. Good heavens, put her in an asylum. She's insane. What does insane mean? Non sane, not clean. That's all it means. If you're insane, you're literally unclean. You failed a purity test that is religious and cultural. You failed a purity test. You're homeless. You're on the street. You're drunk in the streets of London. You are a psychopath. In those days, that's what you would be called. If you were a pickpocket, you were a psychopath. If you were a drunk, you were a psychopath. If you had children out of wedlock as a man, if you spawned various children and didn't marry with various women, you were a psychopath, and you belonged in an asylum because you were insane. You were not clean. You'd failed the purity test, and that's where you went. We're still using these terms today. Histrionic personality disorder, literally, and I'm using the word literally, references a woman's womb. Hysterium. The hysterium is the womb. You are hysterical. You are histrionic. You are engaging in histrionics. You know where that comes from? Ancient Greeks believed that when women became hysterical, the womb bounced around the body. You're hysterical. Your womb is bouncing around, and you have a bouncy womb personality disorder. I don't know why they don't put that in the DSM. Why don't they say it's bouncy womb, bad womb, psychopathic womb personality disorder? That's what they should call it. Psycho womb. But they don't. Borderline personality disorder, similarly applied mainly to women. Borderline. I remember when I first heard that. So what the fuck does that mean? You're in the borderlands? You're on the line of something? You're on the edge? What fucking kind of clinical diagnosis tells somebody, well, you're on the edge of clinical diagnosis, but you're not quite there? But it's still a clinical diagnosis. Where was that from historically? Again, predominantly issued by men to women. You are almost psychotic. You are nearly psychotic. You are barely holding your psychotic rage just as on the fucking borderline, your borderline personality disorder. Now, if you're watching this and you have BPD, does that sound like you? Are you fucking, you're on the borderline of fucking psychotic delusion and rage? No. I can tell by the way you type. Like, hello, I've had a BPD diagnosis, and this doesn't sound like me. I'm like, yeah, doesn't fucking sound like you to me either as I'm reading your message. It's not. It's not you. If you're not rageful, you're not highly dissociative, and you're not entitled and exploitative, why are we calling people this? These defunct labels, they're completely out of date. And I'll say it again, and other people on YouTube will say I'm full of shit and it's not true. I can show you where it came from. It's not. You can go and look yourself. Go and read The Mask of Sanity. What does the nice American psychiatrist, he's a funny writer, he seems like a very affable gentleman, the American psychiatrist writing about psychopathy. He does his best to tell the reader what it is, and then he gives up and says, look, it's basically a moral value judgment. It's not a personality disorder. I don't want to get into that today because it's a whole other can of worms, but there is plenty of evidence that the cluster B personality disorders are not personality disorders at all. And that when we say that they are and we medicalize it, we're actually medicalizing and sanitizing, ironically, criminal behavior, immoral behavior. Instead of making it a moral and philosophical issue, we have endeavored to make it a medical issue because we're trying and failing to be doctors. We're role playing that we're like doctors too. You're psychologists. Shut up. No. We run experiments. Yeah, no, actually, you're not like doctors. There's nothing that you can physically draw from somebody and go, I see you have such and such personality disorder. People will cite, yes, there's things that you can draw physically when somebody has been depressed, and you can see that in their neurotransmitters. And I would say it's a logical fallacy that's called cum hoc ergo propter hoc. With this, therefore, because of this, or false causality. Just because, I don't know, say if I'm depressed, and as I'm depressed, in order to cope with my depression, I eat more. What are you going to do? Are you going to say it's McDonald's that made me depressed? You're going to start going through like the ingredients and be like, what is it in McDonald's that's causing his depression? And then clever people will say, actually, there are things in McDonald's that can make you depressed. And I agree with you. However, remember, there are people who eat McDonald's and they are not depressed. So we have just engaged in a logical fallacy. We were looking for something and we went along that line of reasoning, and we didn't break the laws of logic, by the way. It's a logical fallacy, but logic can only go so far. Rationality can only go so far. So what I would say is, if you've got this BPD diagnosis, consider the possibility that your clinician isn't all-knowing, that the field of psychology is not, it's just people trying to figure it out using lists like this of equally weighted traits, something that I find totally unacceptable. This is puerile. This is secondary school stuff. How do you figure out if they have the personality disorder? 9 equally weighted traits. And how will we know if they have it? If they have 7. What if they have 6? No, they don't have it. But if they have 7, they do. Yes. What's special about the number 7? We like it. It's a lucky number. There's nothing special about the number 7, ladies and gents. There's nothing special about the number 6. It's an arbitrary number. It's a totally fucking arbitrary number. They don't know. They don't know. Be impressed if somebody has a PhD, if they're a doctor, know the difference. Please know the difference between a medical doctor and a person with a PhD who's calling themselves doctor. Please be aware of that. It is impressive. It's a huge amount of work. I've never done a PhD, but I've coached people through PhDs. And I was like, I'll never fucking do this. I'm not going to give up 4 years of my life to this mental torture and statistics crunching. Be impressed. It's impressive. It shows that they have a powerful brain, that they are disciplined, that they are truly intellectuals. They're truly cerebral people. But that's it. That's it. And these people who are voting on these personality disorders, I wouldn't take it all too seriously and too much to heart either. If you have the BPD diagnosis, please consider reframing it as CPTSD. Marsha Linehan is doing great work with dialectical behavioral therapy. There is nothing in dialectical behavioral therapy that would not help people with CPTSD. There's nothing there that would be useless. If like you have different responses in CPTSD, if you're a dissociator versus flight versus fight, okay, it's not going to be perfect, but the broad brushstrokes of DBT that has allegedly been helping people with BPD, my personal theory is what she's been doing is helping people misdiagnosed with BPD who actually have CPTSD. Teaching people mindfulness and radical acceptance when they've been heavily traumatized and they have PTSD and CPTSD, massive childhood trauma, have lived in what's it called, ACE, the adverse childhood environment, seems like a really good modality to help people heal and move forward. I'm not surprised she's done well. I just changed the words around a little bit. That's all. It makes sense to me that DBT has worked. I mean, there's elements of DBT that I teach. There's a format of DBT that I would teach people for dealing with CPTSD. So people have said to me, why are you so mean about borderlines? I'm like, I'm mean about actual people who really qualify for that. And really, if they qualify for that, they're on the spectrum for narcissism and psychopathy. And if they're not, they shouldn't be being called borderlines. If they're not criminally inclined, if they're not entitled, they're not exploitative, and they're not deliberately hurting people for their own gains or to feel somewhat better or to consume the other, to recruit the other into themselves to perform their ego functions, it is very unkind and possibly should be considered, what do you call it, where it's like a dereliction of your professional duty, like negligence. It should be illegal. It should be illegal to misdiagnose people. It's a horrible diagnosis. It's a really, really bad diagnosis. Now, I will cite it elsewhere. I'm just going to round this off and then I'm going to take the questions because I'm sure there'll be loads of people got questions and something to say. There is research that's coming out now that brings us full circle. I said historically, all of this grows from the concept of psychopathy, which is a way of understanding criminal behavior. Not what I consider criminal, not what you consider criminal, but when you go against the orthodoxy, when you go against culture, you are a criminal. That's how it works. Don't be mad at me because people saw criminals as that in that time, and it's not me doing that. That's them that's doing that. If you didn't fit in, if you engaged in antisocial behavior, right? Antisocial personality disorder is the new psychopath. So they're going back to the historical roots. And the research is backing this up. They're saying this borderline personality disorder diagnosis, what you're doing is you're mealy mouth. Some researchers, and I don't know where I stand on this yet. I have that right. I'm going to wait. I want more research to come out. I don't know where I stand on this, but they're saying, some people are saying this is psychopathy. This is essentially the operational modality of a female psychopath is borderline personality disorder. This is their idea. Not, I didn't just say that. They said that. I'm quoting other people. Don't shout at me for what other people said. Okay, that's enough. I will now take questions. BPD feels like toxic shame. I would say that toxic shame would be an essential component of CPTSD. I can do this now because I have this thing. Look at that. I can highlight people's comments. I'm on StreamYard. You know, I was complaining like I can't interview people anymore with YouTube because Google Hangouts has gone. If you do this, guys, StreamYard is really good. Really, really good. Master, are you a megalomaniac? No, I am not. Would you consider doing a podcast on CPTSD? I have done podcasts on CPTSD. I think a lot of my recent videos, probably the last 80 to 100 videos, have been on CPTSD. And there are podcasts out there where I talk about CPTSD as well, but I'll do another one for sure. Miss Kismet says, the discipline element of it is what creates robotic application of labels thereafter. There should be more scope for honorary PhDs, for graduates using minds as tools, not weapons. That is a very good point. Fidemi, can't it actually be trauma that has been passed down through generations or directly experienced and not been worked through, which we all have in varying degrees? Not only can it be, that is all it ever is. I am strong on this to the point of being dogmatic. I have never seen, and there is no evidence that your genetics give a single solitary fuck about your personality. I don't think there is ever going to be found a gene that tells whether you're going to prefer vanilla or chocolate ice cream. I don't think that's what genes are for. I don't think your genes directly affect your personality in that way. I think it's environmental. I think it's learned, and I think it's trauma based. That's what gives me my optimism, because when we treat it as though it was learned and we treat it as though it was trauma based, then we can heal it, because you can unlearn it. This is the point of trying to generate neuroplasticity and lay down new neural pathways. It generates healing. Where do you stand on the American NPD diagnosis ingredients list? It's good. It's good. There are things that, again, it's equally weighted. And there are things in there that I'm like, oh, wow, oh, arrogant, wowie, vain, in love with their own sense of self. Wow, how threatening is that? Not particularly. There are things that are missing from it, which now you've put me on the spot. I have 5 of them that I would add, and I can't remember them. One of them is hyper-competitiveness. I think it's a real mistake and an oddity when you're talking. If you're an expert on narcissism and you've dealt a lot with narcissists, let me say it the American way, because some people in America think I don't know how to say the word narcissist. If you're dealing with narcissists and you haven't noticed that they are hyper-competitive children, there's something up. That should definitely be on the diagnostic criteria, that they're hyper competitive, that they see competition where there is none, that they're fundamentally insecure. But then you would then, if you're smart and you know the literature, you'd say, but there are researchers who said that they're fundamentally insecure. There are different types of narcissism. Some of them are compensatory. Some of them perceive slights and shame and then they punish. Okay, fine. But this was the American NPD diagnosis from the DSM, is what Odette asked me. So that's the DSM diagnostic criteria. It's not extensive enough. And, we do need to explore the possibility that it doesn't belong there. Absolutely. There is a trauma response that is fight and fawn, that is extremely predatory and exploitative. And we call it NPD now. It exists. BPD is distinct. I'm convinced it exists. they maybe shouldn't, they maybe need different words applied to them, and they maybe aren't personality disorders. Even the DSM-5 is contradictory, because it says at one point that the contradiction is from one page to the next on the DSM-5 for narcissism. I'm going to have to read it again. It's something like, it says on one page that narcissists are always self-destructive, and then on the next page it says narcissists are always successful. And I don't see how you can always be self-destructive but always be successful at the same time. So it really needs rethinking. The whole thing needs rethinking. Raven Steals the Night says, I think here in America it's so closely tied to insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. I've known people who've had multiple diagnoses and have been put on a freaking cocktail of meds. Yeah, and I've been warned about that with the DSM. They're like, this is how insurance companies, medical insurance companies, that's their reference manual, that's their Bible to look up what the issue is. So if you can't medicate it, it's not really of massive relevance to an insurance company. Which then it's kind of like, well, it goes against the Hippocratic Oath, really. If you're a psychiatrist, you're a doctor first. You're a doctor first and foremost. You've taken the Hippocratic Oath, and you're now going, well, how do we peddle these fucking drugs? If we can't peddle the drugs, then there's no point in having the illness. Hashtag CPTSD. Nobody wants to talk about CPTSD because it resolves way too many. It describes and resolves way too much of the stuff that is currently being medicalized. Well, how will this misdiagnosing BPD ever change? The internet's great, man. YouTube is good. People watch this stuff in big numbers. They share it in big numbers. Two people with BPD diagnosis are going to talk about it and go, have you seen this fucking weird guy? I think he's got like an Australian or a Scottish accent. He's talking about this. Have a little look at this and see what you think. People become savvy to it. The first thing that I would like is for people not to take the word of a clinician on their diagnosis of BPD as like, we've found in a medical test on your blood that you have a virus, which, by the way, even those are faulty. I've had experiences, several significant experiences in my life where samples got mixed up, and you shouldn't just in a toxically passive childlike state go and go, ooh, what is it, big daddy or mummy doctor? You tell me what the issue is, because they're humans and humans get stuff wrong. Let me catch up. Liverpool accent. That's correct. I'm actually from the world, but our accent is informed by Liverpool. Who's winning, empaths or narcissists? Let me show you this. Ryan, fat guy in lil coat. Okay, who's winning, empaths or narcissists? I don't know. I would say that narcissists and psychopaths have definitely been winning for a long time. If you look at the world, it's a world that is carved by narcissists and psychopaths. Like the most aggressive, the people who push themselves to the front of the queue, the people who have a vision, they want to do this thing, and they want to fucking kill people and enslave them, and fucking, I really want this thing, and I don't care how many people. They're the ones who build the world. But perhaps we're moving more towards a more balanced way of getting things done. Maybe we can do things and do great things without that psychopathic narcissistic element. I did speak in UCLA recently. Somebody asked me about how I keep motivated to do what I do. And I was like, I have a grandiose vision. I have a grandiose vision, which is I want to change the way people think about mental health by telling them funny stories on YouTube and not being particularly all that serious about it. But it is definitely a grandiose vision. She was like, oh, that sounds kind of narcissistic. And I'm like, well, it's got a grandiose element to it. So sometimes some of these traits and some of these behavior patterns are useful, and they are the things that make the world different. You can't change the world by sitting back meekly and going, I hope somebody notices me. I hope somebody puts me on. Oh, when will I get my interview on Ellen DeGeneres? Never is the answer. Will doing the hand mnemonic solve all of CPTSD? No. It's the only thing the hand mnemonic can do for you is to reduce your emotional flashbacks. There are people who tell me that just the hand mnemonic completely healed their emotional flashbacks. But CPTSD is not just emotional flashbacks. It's also a hijacked and toxic superego. In the realm of CPTSD, we would call that the inner critic and the outer critic. There's more to CPTSD than just emotional flashbacks, but the hand mnemonic is a very good tool to quickly reduce and perhaps eradicate for some their emotional flashbacks. How come some get narcissistic and others empathic after trauma? I presume you mean in childhood. I've always followed a fairly simplistic model to understand that. It's simplistic, but it seems to work. It seems to have quite a high level of redundancy. The golden child and the black sheep. So narcissists are usually produced, or people on the cluster B spectrum are produced by other people on the cluster B spectrum. So if you're raised in a narcissistic community, a cult, a church, a family unit, or an institution, it can produce narcissism in you. Narcissists tend to split. So if you have two little boys being raised by a narcissistic cult or household or church, they will engage in splitting, and they'll split off bad parts of themselves, and then they'll project them into one of the two children. So for this example, we'll just use two children. As I said, it's simplistic. And then we'll have the golden child, and then we'll have the black sheep. The black sheep can never do anything right. Everything they do is wrong. I'm the narcissistic parent, let's pretend. All of my weakness, my failures, my shame is projected into child number one, but child number two, nothing they do is wrong. All those people they murdered whilst drunk and high on cocaine in the new BMW I bought them, they just shouldn't have been standing there. You know, you've seen these affluenza cases, or the original affluenza case. That is golden child. Now, they're raised actually in the same environment by the same people. They're raised in the same physical space. They're raised in similar psychological conditions, but the way they're treated is different. So the black sheep will probably become you said empath. I used to say empath. It's a confusing term. You should say codependent or fawn responder. Codependency. One thing I need to talk about on this channel is dependent personality disorder, because some of us are vectoring in for that. People pleaser. Empath has developed a mystical element to it, psychic element to it, and a rigid orthodoxy to it. People come at you and go, "I'm an empath," and I'm like, "Ooh, okay." It's like, for me, I'm like, well, let me just check you out a little bit. Like, if you announce that you're an empath straight away, I'm like that. Get back, 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 back. I'll give you empath. So yeah, black sheep, golden child, splitting of parent. All of the good things that are in me. He's so wonderful. He's godlike. This one, pointless creature. Why did I have you? You're so ugly and stupid. And yes, you play the piano at a very high level, but it's just, what's to play the piano? What a stupid instrument. So no matter how amazing you are or what you do, it will be dismissed. No matter how awful the golden child is, no matter how badly they behave or how useless they are, everything will be lauded as wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Why are people using empath's word? Well, I mean, like, the concept of empathy is good, right? The concept of compassion and empathy is good. It's just, it's gone a little bit blurred. So people go, well, that's the way I used to use it. I was like, empathy is so important. It's so critical to be empathic. We should be empaths. And I was like, I consider myself to be an empath because I'm empathic. And then I saw the way other people were using it, and I was like, oh, actually, ironically enough, this sounds incredibly narcissistic. The way that they're saying it is like, I'm blameless, I'm, saintly, which can be an element of dependent personality disorder, by the way. I'm saintly, I'm faultless, I'm blameless. Why? I am an empath, and it's like, really, dude, you're just a person with socks. How effective is EMDR for CPTSD recovery? Well, I don't use it, so there's your answer. I was the black sheep of my family. How can I forgive my mother? I don't know how to answer that quickly. It is going to take time, and perhaps total forgiveness is not what is required, but something that would be next door to forgiveness that would look something like letting go. And it takes time. You've got to be able to grieve what was lost, and you've got to deal with the anger that will be behind the sadness, and then the sadness that is behind the anger. So you go sad, break down, break down, break down, anger, anger, anger. Well, white hot rage, burning rage, resentment, super, super sad, really grieving, abandoned child level of sadness. Okay, then done. That's how you approach that. Mr. Soprano says, "I like the term empath. Yeah, I mean, if it's useful for you, then use it. But I personally, it makes me feel nauseous now. I mean, if it's used, I can tell when somebody's using it innocently. They're like, "Oh, what's wrong with the term empath? Sounds cool to me." Or when they're using it like a stick to hit you over the head with, "I'm an empath." I'm like, "Oh, great." Does it hurt? um, Mike says, this BPS, British Psychological Society paper is interesting. The PTM framework, patterns in emotional distress, unusual experiences, and troubled behavior as an alternative to psychiatric diagnosis. What is the PTM framework, sir? Give us a live link if you can. Just post a live link, and people go and, or if you can't, please post it in the comments afterwards, and I'll have a look, and other people can go and check out what the PTM framework is. The title sounds juicy. Can binge eating be a form of emotional flashback? Yes, absolutely. If it was Gabor Mate that said something about binge eating, particularly, and relating it to the concept as hungry ghosts concept, feelings of emptiness, feelings of not being there, feelings of being, ghost-like. And then binge eating serves many functions. It reduces anxiety, it grounds you back in the body, it can make you sleepy. It can numb you depending on what you've been binge eating on. Like heavy carbohydrate, highly salted food can make you feel very, very numbed out. Very sugary food can make you feel very blissed out. So yeah, absolutely. I don't know whether the binge eating is actually an emotional flashback as such, but it's a way of moderating ongoing, cascading, daily, hourly emotional flashbacks. It's a way of dealing with them. Is the black sheep also a scapegoat? Yes, it's the same thing. Black sheep, scapegoat, all the cattle. Announcing S. Ashcroft says, announcing that you're an empath would be virtue signaling, wouldn't it? Yeah, I guess so. I wouldn't. I wasn't going to be that mean, but so I didn't say that. Somebody who's a stapler said that. Look at this. He's a stapler. The naughty stapler said it. My ex claimed to be the victim after making death threats and all kinds of things, and he was believed. Yeah. I mean, there are particular, like, having just said, we shouldn't use the term borderline personality disorder. What I meant was we need another word for what that thing is. There is a thing there, and it's definitely a mental illness, without a doubt. It's a response to trauma. It's specific. It has reliable traits detectable over time through multiple contexts, and you see it in different people. Like, I'm going to do a video, I've been promising to do it for over 2 years, where I'm going to break down how I detect, just through reading people's emails or their comments online, if what I'm saying is BPD. Because as I said, I worked with people unknowingly. I worked with many people with BPD for about a year to 18 months, and then I figured it out. And I would say there's like 10 or 11 things that I can show you. So if I can reliably tell through the way somebody's writing and speaking, and sometimes it's the manner of dress and how they'll present themselves, that it's BPD, then I'm not going to stand here and say there isn't something. Is it distinct from narcissistic personality disorder? In my view, yes. Is it distinct from psychopathy? In my view, yes. I was only citing the research earlier that said no, it should be considered female psychopathy is borderline, essentially. I think they are distinct, in my humble opinion. If we're talking in the realms of philosophy, the philosophy of psychology, they are distinct. It is useful to consider them in a different way. When someone hits you and they cry out in pain, this would be one of my diagnostic criteria for BPD. I have a different diagnostic criteria for BPD. It's not equally weighted, and it's way more subtle than that one. This isn't, I'm not being a dick. This isn't useless. Like, this is BPD, but this is like the fucking tip of the iceberg. BPD is way more than this, and there are sentences, patterns of behavior, and certain things that you will always see. And striking you and crying out in pain. So I literally go, ow, oh my God, as I hit you, BPD. To me, in my humble opinion, that's not published research. That's the opinion of a guy who stumbled into this area. It's my understanding that being an empath is a personality type. Okay. And just because people have empathy doesn't automatically make them an empath, as empathy is a human characteristic. There is distinction. I don't know. I don't know that being an empath is considered like a legitimate personality type per se. Mariana Menendez, Maria from Galicia, or Asturias, somewhere in Spain, probably Madrid, says, I now fear, jokes blood, I now fear everyone who says he's an empath. Narcissists are empaths if we're orthodox. Yes, absolutely. If we're being orthodox, narcissists are empaths. Narcissists are codependents. Narcissists have CPTSD. Mind blown, because you're trained in this. You have the qualifications in this. You can think about this with nuance because you've been trained to do exactly that. Most humans want to try and make a simple solution to a really complicated, frightening, and painful problem, and they don't like that. They want CPTSD, narcissist, empath, narcissist. So when you start going, no, narcissists are empaths. They're really, really empathic. They'll be like, wait a second, this is my team. They're on the red team. I'm on the blue team. No, then no. And you're like, sorry, dude, that's just the fucking psychology of it. They're hugely empathic. How do you think they do what they do? How do you think they're so good at reading you? How do you think they know every little weakness you have, every little fantasy you have? Because they're super empathic. They're not codependent. They're not codependent. Yes, they are. They're the ultimate codependent because they have no ego. No, they have huge egos. They're so egoic. You don't know my ex-husband. Well, I probably do, actually, because they don't differ that much one from the other, and all the stories are the same. They say the same sentences, and they don't have an ego. There's no ego boundaries there. That's why they think everything is theirs, because there's no ego boundaries. They have a super ego, a huge, bloated, furious, hyper judgmental super ego, but ego boundaries they have not. So there isn't really an ego there as such. So yeah, I mean that's probably black belt material that that's just confused people, but it does need to be understood with nuance because it's a really complicated subject. And even, psychologists and psychiatrists, they struggle with it. So we shouldn't just assume we can watch like a couple of YouTube videos and go, oh yeah, I'm a fucking narcissism expert. Like, really? Are you keeping up with all the published research from the last 7 years? Really? Have you read all the research that goes back, 60s, 70s, and 80s? I fucking haven't. I don't know many people who have. So you got to be careful when you I know what this is because I've seen 5 videos on YouTube. It's like, oh, even psychologists, even the clinicians, even the peer-reviewed research doesn't say we know what it is. It goes, it seems to be the case that maybe this works when we look at it this way. That's how science is. That's how science talks. It's not a purist orthodoxy. This is it. We know you're on this side, you're on that side. No, that's not science thinking. That's trauma thinking. That's black and white thinking. You're rigid. You're trying to put them in that camp and you in this camp. So that, it's a defense mechanism. It's an infantile defense mechanism. Okay. I'm going to catch right the way up. There's a lot of really good questions here, guys. I'm not going to be able to get to them all. I'm so sorry about that. Would a former criminal still qualifying as having ASPD? It depends on who tests him. It depends on what modality they use. Not every. I know I've said certain words here, but the logic doesn't flow both ways. So what I was saying is, back in the day, if you were a criminal, then you would be diagnosed as a psychopath. But not everybody who we see nowadays who is a criminal. Like, I'm a criminal. I've been done speeding 3 times this year. And if I keep doing it, they're going to fucking take my license off me. So I've broken the law. So I'm a criminal. But would I be testing positive on a psychopath test or a test for ASPD? No. So it doesn't flow. So everybody who has ASPD is a criminal, but not everybody who's a criminal has ASPD. Though many are, and it depends on the test. It really depends on the test that's being done. Mariana Menendez says, criminal. There is a bachata track called Criminal that I really, really like at the moment, just as it happens. So you see me driving around singing Criminal, Criminal. Highly sensitive person being, in fact, CPTSD. Is there a non-trauma related HSP? I don't know much about HSP. I've never gotten into the highly sensitive person thing. So I don't know whether it's considered, like how well considered it is in the published literature. But you know, if you are hypersensitive to environments, absolutely that could come from trauma. Absolutely that could come from CPTSD. Depends whether you get the diagnosis or not. I think Miss Kismet is responding to would depend whether she's had a good morning on the day. I'm concerned for the way my narcissistic son's father will raise him during his time with him. Yeah, this is a problem that comes up a lot. I'm afraid I don't have any pat solutions for you with this one. There is this thing of like co-parenting with a narcissist, and it's I think maybe it was Sam that said it, or somebody said it's actually counter-parenting. You have to undo the stuff that they're doing. Very difficult. Trauma Counseling Tools says, I was a criminal and was in prison twice. I developed awareness and now I'm a counsellor. That's awesome. Good on you, mate. Somebody with some life experience there who's now a counsellor. Aaron asks, why do red pill guys lend so much weight to BPD abuse, whereas NPD abuse is worse? Hang on a second. Slow down there, Billy. I don't know that red pill guys do lend so much weight to BPD. I've not seen that. I've not seen evidence of it. I don't know the red pill community. They're not hardly at all. Certainly not well enough to make a statement like that. BPD abuse is not less than narcissistic abuse. Don't say that to people who've been living with a borderline, like, oh, narcissistic abuse is worse. Abuse is abuse, and it erodes the person's sense of self. It's horrendous. Narcissistic abuse, borderline abuse, whatever abuse, it's really unpleasant to be stuck in that kind of a situation. So one is not worse than the other. BPDs will resort to self-harm, whereas NPD's wrath is reserved solely for their victims, ? I'm not sure whether those are statements or an authentic question, sir. I've never heard. BPDs will threaten self-harm, certainly. NPD's wrath is reserved solely for their victims. I don't know that statement is necessarily true. Chris has said, I was diagnosed as BPD and sent to DBT therapy. I left after a few months, not allowed to talk about my trauma or see a psychiatrist for meds, and have been isolating since October. It is August now. Who disallowed you, my friend? Who disallowed you from doing what you wanted to do with your healing as a sovereign adult? Please do make sure you get the help that you feel would benefit you the most. That would be great. I've been done doing speeding. Ha ha ha. It's not funny. They're really cracking down in the United Kingdom at the moment. Not like speeding, like 36 and a 30, 3 times. They made me do a course. It was actually a pretty good course. They were like, you don't have to have points on your license. You can go and do a course. Would you like to do a course? Fine, give me the course. And they were like, do you understand what the speed limit is? And I was like, yes. So they would show you pictures. It's a 4-hour course, and they go, "What's the speed limit here?" And I was like, 90. I go, no, it's 50. So I was just driving too fast. Lucas West says, "You absolute madman." I know, 36 and a 30. They'll never take me alive, Lucas. They'll never flip and take me alive. Okay. Latang says, for a narcissist, you are an object, but they can never really be loving with their internal objects. Sam Batman claims the narcissists have intimacy with internal objects like nobody else. Does he? I'm trying to. Yeah, that rings a bell. That rings a bell. But they can really be loving with their internal objects. Yeah, yeah, he does say that. I'm not going to speak to Sam about that. Ask him that question because I don't want to get it wrong. There's some things that Sam has said that I've talked to him face to face, and I'm like, I'm super confident. I've read it. He spoke to me. He told me. I know this one. That rings a bell, but I don't want to say anything. And obviously, Sam's understanding of narcissism is far, far superior to mine. When I was asking about people who actually read the research, Sam Backman has actually read the research. All these abbreviated labels are irritating. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Let me see. Any questions, guys? Should be single sentence and ending a question mark. What about closet narcissism? Just don't buy from IKEA, right? Tell you what, those Scandies, they're a narcissistic bunch, aren't they? Do you mean covert narcissism or vulnerable narcissism? Yeah, it's interesting. I do think it's a useful distinction. My favorite term is not covert narcissist. My favorite term would be fragile, the fragile narcissist. It's probably is a better way of defining what it is. Covert, it's like, oh, sneaky, you can't see that I'm, whereas fragile is really what covert narcissism is, about fragility. If someone was cruel to animals as a child, are they always psychopaths? No. Can you guide a child through the emotional literacy and flashbacks work? If you forced me, I could. I've not worked with kids for a while. Like, how young is the child? I'd guide a teen. Like, most of my work when I was in schools with teenagers, if they're stroppy and moody and like swearing and smoking, I could kind of get them on side. But children, I've got no. I don't know. Yeah, you probably could if you reframe. Like, it's like anything, isn't it? If you reframe it, you color it, you give it different names, different titles that's appropriate to the different age, because they change so rapidly in like 2-year periods. So you have to be like, oh, if they're 6, it's going to be like Nelly the elephant's emotional heart storm, or I don't know, like, I don't know, whatever the thing. Like, you just figure it out, but you talk at that level where they can comprehend, and you don't push them beyond. Don't try to push them beyond a level of comprehension that they don't have. It's not fair. It's boundary breaking. Like giving primary school children sex education. What is the world coming to? 36 and a 30. Petty. I know. Okie dokie. At what age? Chris Piedmont. Yeah, I tell you what. In with a good question here. Chris Piedmont. At what age can you diagnose personality disorders? I'm going to hand that over to you guys. Can you comment, please, if you know what age personality disorders can be diagnosed? Please write in the comments. Nobody wants to comment. Everybody's like, fuck, I'm going to get it wrong. Kaz says 18. S. Lindbergh, 18. Bob says 15. After 25, 18. It, it's one of these. It's an area of controversy. It's an area of controversy. In some states in America, they'll say absolutely by 18 your personality's formed, and that's the end of that. But then you have to ask the question: well, how are children the age of 8 being given the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder? Then it's not fixed, ladies and gents. It's not rigid. It's not. It's if you could see it from the other side, I think you probably would be horrified by how loose and how personality driven it is. I mean, like politically, like I don't know, like this institution does it this way. Why? Because Tony Big Ball Bags has got the government fucking grant that everybody wants, and he says that it's 17 years old. So in this institution, where I'm being paid $60,000 a year, where in the other fucking shithole I was on 40,000, it's 17 years. And you ask me, and I just say it's fucking 17 years. It's a mess out there. It's a fucking mess out there. I personally would say 18 is too young. You'll hear me say, oh, people get away with too much for too long. People are kept in their adolescence for too long. This is one area where I'm quite a more sort of like liberal leaning, where I actually think humans generally up until the age of 25 are still pretty flexible and pretty stupid. So I wouldn't be like, you're 21 years old, you did this stupid crime, you're going to get the same as somebody who's 31 years old. I would give leeway, and judges do. They have the discretion to do that. In the realm of psychology, I would say we know your brain is still forming. We know your neuroplasticity is still high, I think up until the age of 24. It's still naturally very, very high. So I don't know, like personality disorders. But yes, the proper answer really is 18. Chris, I know you're in America, you're in Florida. If you ask around, it will be, most people are going to say, most people in most states, they'll say by 18 years old, your personality's formed, and that's when a personality disorder can be diagnosed. But they are diagnosing people younger than 18. Crazy. Don't they say that the brain isn't done until 26? I've read 24, 25, and 26. I've read all those different ages. I was being conservative when I said 24. I'm 34, still pretty stupid. Welcome to the club, 41. And I have odd socks on. Again, I just bought all black socks, but even with all black socks, I still know that these don't match. Borderline seek answers to their behaviors. I'm always searching inside myself and also outside sources as to why I act the way I do. I have borderline traits. Am I borderline? I couldn't tell you. No way of me knowing whether you have this thing that is currently called borderline. If you are struggling with emotional flashbacks, if you struggle with like terror, are you terrified of abandonment? Do you cause abandonment again and again and again? You really struggling with anxiety, really struggling with rage? Do you struggle to even acknowledge that you have rage? That's becomes problematic. Do you find yourself fantasizing about punishing people for slights committed against you, even if they're accidental? Do you hold grudges that go on for years and that eat away at you? Do you want to take revenge on people who are long dead? Does that keep you awake at night? These are the kinds of questions that I would be asking. If you're looking for answers to your behaviors and you're trying to heal, then I would say, dude, you know what? It doesn't matter what you are now. Focus on what you want to be. What do you want to be? You want to be happy. You want to be content. You want to be calm. You can have these things. If it's CPTSD and the issue is emotional flashbacks, then you won't rigidly refuse the help. Because if you are, by my understanding of borderline, which would be, it's got to be comorbid with narcissism, or I just refuse. I'm like, that's not borderline. If it's not comorbid with narcissism, it's not borderline. If it is comorbid with narcissism, you will refuse the help. You won't permit the help to seep in because it requires vulnerability and it requires humility. And there are two things that a true borderline would never be able to engage in. Never. If they're a true borderline, it's just not going to happen. So if you can be humble and you can be vulnerable and you can ask for help and you can follow a process and you can trust somebody long enough to follow their process, then you can heal. And that would be a nice thing to see. I'm very optimistic, very, very optimistic about that kind of thing. If you're asking these kinds of questions, I would be saying that would be a counterindication for entitlement. Because if you're entitled, you'd be like, no, it's my mother's fault. No, it's the government's fault. No, it's my ex-husband's fault. No, it's that. You would be out there. You would externalize your locus of control. You've internalized the locus of control. You say, well, maybe it's me. Maybe there's something I could do. When I do this, is it like, so maybe, is there a spectrum of borderline? I don't know. There's definitely a spectrum of CPTSD. So perhaps you're somewhere on that spectrum with your CPTSD traits. Why don't you try reducing the emotional flashbacks? Try it for a month. Give yourself a month of reducing the emotional flashbacks. See how you feel after a month. If you feel significantly different, then let's just go right ahead and just say it's CPTSD. That's a key point. The locus of control, says Mariana Menendez. Where is she from? Asturias, Galicia, Madrid. I'm not sure. Yes, the locus of control is really, really key. So in the narcissist and empath, codependent, fawn dynamic, the narcissist hyper externalizes the locus of control, hyper externalizes it. It's always your fault. It's always their fault. It's never my fault. The codependent neurotically, similarly, just as wrong, similarly hyper internalizes the locus of control for the relationship. It's all my fault. Everything that's happening here is because of me. Can you see how that's grandiose in its own way, right? We, the codependents, are grandiose. Well, like, for number one, I can heal them. Oh, you can fucking heal an adult, can you? How are you going to do that? With love. Oh, you have magic genitals. Wow. You should be famous. I'll love them better with my magic wand. It's ridiculous. But we think this way because it's infantile. We're also traumatized. We're the black sheep. That's the golden child. So hyper internalized locus of control would be, it's always my fault and never your fault. Why can't I leave? Why can't I see when he's mean to me? Why can't I see when she manipulates me? Because it's always your fault. You're never right. They're always right. You're always wrong. So the locus of control is a huge issue. Absolutely. I will answer one more question, and then I probably should go to my Jeffrey Beddingtons. Jane Doe says, one simply does not just reduce emotional flashbacks. I agree. It takes time. It takes a while. And it takes the strength of, I nearly said Ned Stark, but that meme is not Ned Stark, is it? Somebody help me out. Who was what was the character's name? Sean Bean in Lord of the Rings. God damn it. But can't black sheeps be narcissistic? Yes. Why do you want to complicate things, Annie Walker? There's people here who want simple answers, and you keep wanting. No. This is blue belt information. I want black belt second dan information. Yes, black sheep typically are narcissistic. If you're a scapegoat and you're a black sheep and you're traumatized in that way, your first infantile defense to always being wrong will be to engage in a narcissistic defensive narrative. Of course, your defense will become narcissistic. But why did you do this? Why? I was ready for bed. But there is a huge difference between being like, they have the same word, but there is narcissistic, and then there is NPD. I just said before, NPD might not be a PD, but there's this thing that currently we're calling NPD, and I would define it as a shell-like personality, a shell-like personality formation. Let's not say disorder. Let's say it's a sort of formation. The shell is crusty, ossified shame, toxic shame, experienced by a child, not filtered through the ego boundaries of an adult who's like, oh, my mother, she's behind on her mortgage repayments, and that's why she's being cranky with me today. No, it's the toxic shame of a child who's being told by the primary caregiver that they are a bad object, unworthy of love, and dirty and pointless and toxic. So they internalize that shame, and it creates this shell to defend against what? Feelings of shame. The shell, the hard shell that ossifies in childhood for full-blown NPD, is the critical issue with NPD. If a black sheep is narcissistic, and they will be, sometimes highly narcissistic, they can still be reached. They can still be healed, because that narcissism, you could say, is a CPTSD response. It's a fight, fawn response. I need to perceive myself as being more than I am to deal with the hideous trauma of what I've been through. So you go, oh, okay. So can you see how you're exploitative of people? Well, I'm not really exploitative of people. It's kind of like they want me to exploit, or whatever the bullshit narcissistic story is. But like, narcissism is narcissism. Narcissistic behavior is narcissistic behavior. So yes, black sheep can be narcissistic, but they're not typically encompassed in this crusty shell of shame that's a defense mechanism to a toxic environment. And they can be shown. They can be like, can you reflect on your actions? Can you see how that wasn't very nice? Can you see how that was exploitative? Can you see how that hurt people? Yeah. You were hurt, weren't you? Yeah. Did it feel good? No. So you're doing that to other people. You're now bullying people. And you're doing it under the banner of being a black sheep. That's your justification. I was abused, so now I'm... Dude, that really... Is that how you're going to be? Where's your moral philosophy? How are you going to live your life? Where is your philosophy? Fuck. Okay. All right. So we can... Then we can get some reflection from the client. We can get some self-awareness from the client. They go, yeah, you're right. You know what? This is not good. I'm repeating patterns of behavior that from other people. I'm repeating the trauma. I'm living it out again. So yes, black sheep can, frequently will, be narcissistic. Scapegoats, of course. Look at any scapegoated culture in history. Every scapegoated culture in history responds with narcissism. Narcissism is always an infantile defense to trauma. Narcissism is always an infantile defense to trauma that is completely overwhelming, so powerful, so all-consuming that it shatters the ego boundaries, shatters them. Sam Vaknin once said of, he said it, I think there's a clip actually, there's a narcissism documentary I did a couple of years ago, and he said, in the case of narcissism, you want to call for help, you call the Ghostbusters. You should call it Ghostbusters, because a narcissist is an empty shell. He said it's a haunted house. There's only ghosts there. There's nothing there. And I agree. I would take a little bit further and say, sometimes really the useful way to think of them is actually where a house used to be. There's no walls anymore. There's like the outline of where, there's the foundation, and then there's like one stick, and that's it. There's nothing. It's blown apart. And that space is then inhabited by the ghost of the narcissistic personality. All the authentic emotions are dead. They died years ago. They died in childhood. All the vulnerability, all of the spontaneity, all of the intuition, the lust for life. I used to talk a lot about samangat, the Malay word for intent, the lust for life and thriving. Dead, all dead. Where did it die? It died inside of a nuclear bomb shelter that they created. There's a nuclear war out there. What should we do? We'll fucking hide in this concrete box. Oh, I can't breathe. Well, you can't go outside. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, you got to stay in the box. But I can't breathe in the box. Well, you can't go outside. But I can't stay in the box. Well, what are we going to do? You see, I have nothing but the most amount of sympathy for the child that's there. There's a borderline and a psychopath and a narcissist. The child, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 6-year-old, still rescuable, no matter what. Still helpable, I believe, no matter what. No matter what's that could be my malignant optimism, perhaps, I don't know. But at that young age, seeing as we were talking about ages before, at that young age, still rescuable, still can be retrained to see the world in a more positive way by being allowed stable attachments with adults who aren't lunatics. So yeah, you've got me talking about the formation of narcissistic personality disorder. Sprinklers have come on, which tells me it's midnight. I need to do my spells. I always do them when the sprinklers are on. It's midnight. It's the time. It's the spell time, homies. Okay. I hope that was useful. I hope that I've cleared up my stance on borderlines. I like to say crazy stuff on videos, but I also don't want to just troll people. And most people who've been following me for a while, I always assume people know where I'm coming from. I assume that everybody's been following from a while. So people who've been following me for a while know what my stance is with the borderline issue. Like, I don't know. I used to throw numbers out. I used to say 80% of people with borderline personality disorder are misdiagnosed at CPTSD. 90% of people. I don't do that anymore because I have no way of knowing. Most of the people that I've spoken to in recent years, not in the early days of Spartan Life Coach when I had no freaking boundaries and didn't know what I needed to defend myself against, but in recent years, when people are coming to me and they say I have borderline personality disorder, a few genuinely do have something with them that is not right and it's nasty. But the overwhelming majority is just CPTSD. And by the way, I have cases where I know that it was CPTSD because I was in correspondence with them via email and they got better. And I was like, well, get back to me if you backslide or if anything goes wrong. Either I don't hear from them for a couple of years, so I assume everything's okay, or they message me a couple of years later and they say everything's okay. So it's anecdotal, that's not proof, but I've experienced like reason to believe that many people it's just CPTSD. That's it. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention. I hope this was useful, and I do look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers. Oh, by the way, Wednesday, 9 o'clock, Spanish time. You'll have to look it up on Google Time and Motion Studies. I'm doing another interview with Pierre So. People seem to like the last one. I certainly enjoyed doing it. Nice to chat with an intelligent chap with a lot of interesting things to say. So Wednesday, 9 o'clock, I'm going to be going live again with him. Cheers.